former mayor, the late mayor, I hate to say at this point, laid it out very well. That, there were strides that were taken by some and others were able to go further. And sometimes those who took strides knew that they were limited in how far they could go, but they paved the way for others to go further. Absolutely. There are so many people who would have been president, would have been governor, would have been mayor, but our country had not gotten over the 244 years of slavery, another 100 years of segregation, and that's why it took so long.
For listeners who don't know this history, who was your father, Basil Patterson? And I know, but a lot of the listeners don't know. And what was the context of this Gang of Four as they were known as neighborhood political leaders? Your father and Dinkins and Congressman Rangel and former Manhattan Borough President Percy Sutton.
Well, my father grew up in Harlem. He was born in Harlem. He went to St. John's Law School and became a lawyer. And unfortunately, when he was 16 years old, he was getting off of the subway and he had his baseball glove. He was coming from playing stickball. And a police officer asked him where he got the glove. And he told him it was his glove. The officer pistol whipped him. And the NAACP came to my father's house and said that there were 20 witnesses, 3 of them white, to what the officer had done to him. And they wanted to file a suit against the New York City and the police department. And my father's father, my grandfather, said to them, you can do that, but you can't protect my son who's out on the streets if we have that lawsuit. And he forbid them to take this lawsuit. And I think my father felt badly that couldn't happen. And that was when he said, he was 16, that was when he decided he wanted to be in public service. So he was with Percy Sutton in a particular club, and Dinkins and Rangel were in a different club. So they were actually adversaries when they first knew each other. When my father ran to the state senate in 1965, I was 11 years old, and we were campaigning, and we were taking David Dinkins signs down, which seems quite interesting in terms of what the years to come. But the reason I think that they were linked together is because they were all very talented. They all had great ability, but they also had an ability to compromise with each other. Because in other neighborhoods, there were some people, I would say their talent was comparable, but they just couldn't stop fighting. And all of these men had diplomacy in their vocabulary, and that's why they're as heralded as they are now.
Dinkins was the least flamboyant of the 4, I think it's accurate to say. So how did he become the one to rise to mayor?
Yes, Jack Newfield once said, if the Gang of Four were the Beatles, Dinkins was Ringo Starr. Yes. And so what it was, I think, with Dinkins, my father was the one who was scheduled to run for mayor in 1985. He developed a heart condition that made him feel that he could not interact, as much as he could before. Dinkins runs and wins for borough president in 1985. Rangel was looking to become Ways and Means chair, so he wasn't going to leave Congress. Sutton had left government after he lost the 1977 mayoral race to run inner city broadcasting, the FM radio stations, and had a cadre of radio stations around the country. So it really was Dinkins who was next in line. And I don't think Mayor Dinkins himself wanted to run for mayor. His big ambition was to be borough president. Just to give you the idea of the diminished expectations there were in the black community at that time. But what changed it was the court case that held that the Board of Estimate had to be dissolved because it violated one man, one vote, or one person, one vote.
It used to be, for people who don't know, it used to be something called the Board of Estimate, not the city council that held most of the political power in New York. Go ahead.
Most of the political power. And so Dinkins, as borough president, was going to lose a lot of power. And that's when the idea of running for mayor came to him in late 1988, and he announces and wins in 89.
So, listeners, we do want your David Dinkins memories. We want your David Dinkins tributes. We want your David Dinkins questions for former Governor David Patterson. 646. One second. Let me just give out the phone number for our listeners so they can join. 646-435-7280. 646-435-7280 or tweet at Brian Lehrer. Governor, go ahead.
So, I've done a lot of interviews in the last few days, and they always preempted what I said, and they had me quoted as saying what everyone else said, that he was a wonderful gentleman, people liked him, he was appreciated on both sides of the aisle, he loved kids, and that he was great to work with. And what I wanted to point out is that I think in terms of what's going on today, that history is very anachronistic when it comes to Mayor Dinkins. So, for instance, you hear people saying now, the subways are dangerous, there's homelessness all over the city, crime has spiked, this is the worst thing since the 80s. Then, when they're unhappy with Mayor de Blasio, they say this is the worst thing that's happened since Dinkins. And they connect Dinkins with what was going on in the 80s, when in fact, he never served 1 second of the 80s as mayor of the city of New York. He was elected in 1990. Now, former police commissioner Ray Kelly said yesterday that between 1984 and 1990, this is before Dinkins comes in, that crime spiked 64% in the city. That 64% took the death toll from homicides over 2,000 by 1986. So when Dinkins became mayor, we already were losing 2,000 New Yorkers every year. It stayed over 2,000 for 2 years, and then Dinkins cut the crime rate by 25% with his City Safe Streets Act that was passed in Albany. So this notion that all these terrible things were going on during Dinkins actually went on during Mayor Koch. And I'm not here to besmirch Mayor Koch. The real cause of the problem all around the country was the crack epidemic that started in 1985. But this whole idea that Dinkins supervised the lawlessness, that he caused the budget to become imbalanced, when in fact, when he left office in 1993, New York City had a $500 million surplus, which mayors, public officials are not known for leaving surpluses because they could spend that money on programs before they left. And the 6,000 police officers that Dinkins got from federal money for the City Safe Streets Act did not join the force until the administration of Mayor Giuliani. So I just wanted to make the record straight. I'm not saying David Dinkins was the greatest mayor that the city ever had. I'm saying he was a very good mayor.
And I talked about this on yesterday's show too, how crime was going up and up and up on Ed Koch's watch for those 12 years, certainly the murder rate, as you just cited, and yet people didn't seem to hold him personally responsible for it in the way that they did Mayor David Dinkins in his first year. So you want to just say it? Do you think that was racist?
I think it was racialized. I don't think that some of the people who said it are actually themselves racist, but to equate the crime which they saw as being committed by black and brown people with what they saw as the ineptness of Dinkins, when in fact they put it on his report card and he wasn't even in school, was, really outrageous. And it's one of the reasons I'm so happy you gave me the chance to say this, because I said it to everyone else, and they take the clips and they have me saying he was like an uncle to me. Yeah, he was like an uncle to me. But what they're going to do is be nice to Dinkins for a few days now that he passed away, and within 6 months we'll be back to saying, oh, back when Dinkins was mayor, all these things went wrong. Dinkins was a healer and an administrator that changed things. He's the one that implemented the Civilian Complaint Review Board in 1992.
Well, not only that, he was the first one who hired Ray Kelly, and he was the first one who hired William Bratton to fight crime in New York City, and he raised taxes to fund more police. You mentioned the Safe Streets, Safe City program. That was largely simply to increase the number of police officers on the force to start to really fight back that crime. Imagine a Democratic politician today proposing to raise taxes to fund the police for more cops.
Well, I'll tell you something right now. If I was in government right now, with the problems that have occurred with police departments around the country, I would devote more money. I would refund the police department and change the whole concept of policing rather than defunding a system that to many people isn't working and then let it look even worse than it did before. And Mayor Dinkins may have taught us a lesson, particularly Democrats, who are quick to adopt these little slogans that really don't make any sense. If you're going to clean up the police department, you're going to need more resources, and that's exactly what the mayor did. That was a very good point, Ryan.
We're remembering David Dinkins, the late mayor of New York from 1989, elected in 89 and served through 93, his one term, with former governor of New York, David Patterson, and Kenny in the Bronx. You're on WNYC. Kenny, thank you for calling in.
Oh, Brian, we love you in the Bronx. My governor, we love you too. My first experience was 19 when I was 19 years old. You know, Afro Latinx gay young man, seeing somebody run for mayor, and in the part of the time when we were apathetic, we got involved, and it was an experience. And we saw a lot of old hands at politics, and they didn't let us in. And Bill Lynch was the campaign manager. God bless his soul, and he said, "No, that kid needs to do this and that," and he put us to work. And all of us, you know, young Dems from the Bronx and Harlem got together, and lifelong friendships have made from that. And I would never be involved in getting involved in public service without him. So I really appreciated the dynamic Harlem Four and the group that made us dream in the Bronx.
Kenny, nicely put. Thank you so much. Please call us again. Hassoni in Brooklyn. You're on WNYC. Hello, Hassoni.
Hi, this is actually Brian. I'm calling you. Live in Brooklyn, but I'm in Martha's Vineyard right now, so take you wherever I go. My memories of Mayor Dinkins is more so about his love affair with his wife. His wife, the beautiful, enormously classy Joyce Dinkins, and how he would always be concerned of where Joyce was. And his love and concern for her was just a true model for what life should be with the person that you're married to. And their legacy of marriages, almost 70 years, is something that I truly admire. And I do believe that he died of heartache. I think it was very difficult for him to be without her. And so I know that every people I know who are very, very close to him and talk to him almost every day talk about just how much he missed her. And so I'm sure that he is finally reunited with her and is probably dancing and looking forward to spending eternity with his wife as he always had envisioned since 1953.
That's so beautiful, Hassoni. Thank you very much. Yeah, David Patterson. Joyce Dinkins just died a few months ago, and
on the mayor's inauguration day, they were riding to the inauguration, and there was a construction site, and they were looking at the construction workers, and Dinkins said to his wife, "You know, this guy, he looks like this old boyfriend of yours that you had years ago." And she said, he said, "It could be him." And she said, "Yeah, it does kind of look like him." And he said, "You know, if you'd married him, you'd be married to a construction worker." And Mrs. Dinkins said to the mayor, "If I married him, he would have been mayor."
Right, he was a real power broker. And I guess she just died last month.
She died on October 12th. She died 6 weeks before him.
Rosie in Brooklyn, you're on WNYC. I have a feeling I know which Rosie in Brooklyn this is. Hi, Rosie.
Hi, Brian. How are you? Happy holidays. Hi, David. How are you as well? Miss seeing you.
How are you?
Good. So
Yes,
I just want to say that, yes, Rosie Perez. This is me. Yes, it is. And you're
Oh, wow.
I love it. So I wanted to say that, you know, as a young budding activist in the AIDS movement, Mayor David Dinkins was the first elected official to ever reach out to me personally and ask me to help New York shine, and said that I had a very promising career as an activist and what I consider being an elected official. I said, oh no, I'll just leave that up to you. But he introduced me around town. I got to know all the political players, and he taught me a lot. And he also invited me to the U.S. Open once he found out that I was not only a boxing fan, but also a tennis fan. And, you know, it was just amazing to go to the U.S. Open with Mayor David Dinkins. But it was even more equally amazing to be acknowledged for my activism and to lend that hand, to extend that hand. How many elected officials do that? The only other elected official that has ever personally reached out to me was Congresswoman Lydia Velasquez, and of course, it was then Senator Barack Obama. But David Dinkins was the first. It was the first person to do that, and I wasn't the only person. In the previous caller, a young man just stated that he reached out to him too. So he just saw people who were on the ground trying to make a difference. He was like, come on inside, get on the inside, and let's make the city a better place. And I miss him dearly. I miss him dearly.
Thank you for that beautiful tribute, Rosie. Thank you so much for calling in. And you know, David, she mentions the tennis stadium in Queens. I don't know that there's ever been a better stadium deal financially for the city and state of New York. Do you have a thought of that?
Yes, the U.S. Open was ready to move out of New York, and they were able to put it together. And by the way, I think it was in very poor taste that when Mayor Giuliani succeeded Mayor Dinkins, that he never went to the West Side Tennis Club. He never went to the U.S. Open. He was always pronouncing that there was chicanery in the way the contract was set, and I see that that kind of reaction has not. We haven't lost that here in America. But when we do, we'll be doing a lot better.
I wonder if the Yankees are embarrassed that Giuliani wears his New York Yankees World Series ring every day as he's doing these wacky news conferences. But I guess we'll have to ask the New York Yankees. Also joining us for a few minutes, Esther Fuchs, longtime Columbia and Barnard public affairs professor who helped bring Mayor Dinkins to Columbia to teach after his mayoralty. She also worked for Mayor Bloomberg in his first term. Hi, Esther. Welcome back to WNYC.
Oh, hi, Brian. Oh, it's great to talk to you and to Governor Patterson, who he knows I'm a long-term fan of Governor Patterson and his perspective.
Esther,
is
happy
so
Thanksgiving.
important.
How are you?
Thank you. Sad like you, but we're, thinking about Mayor Dinkins, we all get to smile, right?
What do you think is important to remember about David Dinkins?
So, I think over the last couple of days, we've been doing a really good job in getting people to understand what his true policy legacy is. And I won't go through the litany of things. I think Governor Patterson, really covered them. I would just say not to forget the Beacon Schools, which were part of the Safe Streets, Safe Cities program, because that was the community policing and helping young people essentially after school and on the weekends. And one of the few things that has managed to stay in place through the Giuliani years, and of course, Mayor Bloomberg expanded it. It's an extraordinary program, Beacons, and it has become a national model. But he did so much at the community level people don't really recognize. And, I agree with David, which is, there's this, focus on his dignity and his grace and his courtliness, all of which is true, right? All of which is true. But it was for a purpose, and I think people need to put that into context, particularly in, modern politics now. Mayor Dinkins came to Columbia to teach kids, to teach young people, and to listen to them in the way he did throughout his entire career. He continued to engage in civic life. When he went to charity events, it was not to put on a tuxedo. It was to help these amazing organizations raise money for the causes that he believed were so important, whether it was Posse for college prep or agency, Association to Benefit Children, his wonderful friend, Gretchen Buchholz. He considered all of her kids in daycare and programs his kids, the junior tennis league, children's health funds, all of that was for purpose. And he lent his name and he showed up. Who shows up? No one shows up. And then what he did at Columbia for students was what he did when he walked down the street and when people stopped him, and he would, not just allow them to take a selfie with him, but he would stand there and listen and encourage and engage. I never, saw anything like it. And I just had the good fortune of having this office that opened up to his office, and I could see what was going on, and he always, invited me in to meet the so-called important people who would come in to see him and ask him for something. And, he did not turn anybody away. He would treat one of the CEPA students the same way he would, treat Reverend Al Sharpton, who came to see him over the years many, many times, and who he treated also respectfully, which I always found to be quite amazing and extraordinary, to be perfectly honest.
Did he? Because I read as I was just trying to remind myself of some things about the Dinkins years, I was reading some old New York Times clippings, and one of them referred to Al Sharpton calling Dinkins a political whore.
That is exactly right, and I'll tell this very quick story because it just shows you who Mayor Dinkins was. So fairly recently, Reverend Sharpton came to see him, and my door was open, and I could hear part of the conversation, and people come when they need something, and he was respectful. He listened. He provided the advice, and he was genuinely warm. And Reverend Sharpton left, and I have to tell you, I walked into the office because he expected me to do that. And I looked at him and I said, how could you do that? How are you able to do that? Why did you do that? And Governor Patterson will recognize this story because I know it's happened to him so many times too. He would smile his smile, It was a deep, deep smile of knowing. And he said, well, he's changed and he's doing good things now, and we need to be supportive of anybody who's really trying to engage the civic conversation in a way that helps people who are underrepresented, as he used to like to say, helps the least among us. And he recognized that, and he wasn't gonna hold as any personal animus. And I'll tell you, I don't know how he could do that, but he did, and he meant it, and it was real. And the one thing, I would just say is the authenticity of this man was so deep and so great. He knew what he had to do, and he knew that he had to do it his way. And when I say civil discourse, I say this now with great importance. He was about figuring out what people had in common. We all know that for him to win that mayoralty the first time, he needed to get 30% of the white vote, and he did. And it was close. It was not hard. It was hard to do. And New York was the last of all the 10 largest cities in this country to elect a black mayor. And as David pointed out, it was a very, very difficult time that he came into office, that he inherited. But he did that. His gorgeous mosaic was not just a metaphor. It was a recognition of people's differences, but that there's ways of fitting the pieces of the mosaic together and figuring out what we have in